These 5 cameras all cost less than $500. They are all interchangeable lens cameras, so you can purchase lenses and really grow into the system. And lastly, of course, they all take great looking photos, and most of them record good looking videos as well. So for pricing with these cameras, these are all $499.99 or something like that, which is technically under $500. I have a camera in pretty much every price point under $500 in this list. So the prices of these cameras range anywhere from around $200 all the way up to close to that $500 price point. So no matter what your budget is, there's probably going to be an option for you in this list. Now also, most of these cameras are fairly old, which means you can only purchase most of these used. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking for a camera that you can purchase new for under $500, there really just isn't very many options for interchangeable lens cameras, and personally I think buying used higher end cameras is much better than buying lower end new cameras. Now down in the description I'm gonna have links to all these cameras from trustworthy used sites like mpb.com and keh.com. They both sell used cameras and camera equipment, and I've purchased multiple items from both of those companies before and had a great experience. So all these cameras, there'll be links down in the description to purchase them used, as well as some accessories and gear that I use with each one of these cameras. There's going to be a huge list of links down there. Feel free to go check those out and research and look into these cameras. And those are affiliate links, so if you do purchase through those links, it'll cost you no extra money, but it'll help me to create more videos like this in the future. I also already have a video out for 5 cameras under $100, so if you're looking for an interchangeable lens camera for under $100, I'm going to link that video down in the description as well. However, I do want to warn you, some of those cameras have gone up in price since that video, and it's possible that that will happen with these two. So again, check the link down in the description for the most updated pricing on every one of these cameras. Now lastly, before we get into it, this video took a ton of time and effort, so if this video helps you out in any way, please consider dropping a like and subscribing. And I'm also going to have more videos like this in the future with different budgets and price points, so you're definitely going to want to subscribe if you don't want to miss those. But without further ado, let's get into camera number 1. So the first camera on the list is the Nikon D3200. So this is a DSLR camera from Nikon that was released in 2012, so just over 10 years ago as of today. And this camera can be found used for right around $200. So this is the lowest priced camera on this list. So I'm going to go ahead and read off a list of some of the main specs that you should know, and then I'm going to talk about my personal experience. And of course, you're going to see a ton of photo and video examples for all these cameras. So the Nikon D3200 has an APS-C sized CMOS sensor with a 1.5 times crop factor. So if you attach a 20mm lens on this camera, it'll be an equivalent field of view of 30mm. The D3200 can shoot 24.2 megapixel raw photos, and it can also record 1080p video up to 30 frames per second. This camera has the Nikon F mount, which is an ultra popular lens mount with a ton of different first party and third party lenses available. On the back of this camera you have a 3-inch fixed LCD screen. This is not a touch screen and it doesn't articulate or move in any way. It's going to be fixed right in this location. Also on the back you have an optical viewfinder right here. So this is a DSLR camera, not a mirrorless. So the optical viewfinder looks through a bunch of mirrors and it's not a digital screen like in a mirrorless camera. So it is slightly older technology, but again, it's a $200 camera that's over 10 years old. This camera can shoot photos up to 4 frames per second, so it's pretty slow. It's not going to be the best for sports photography and wildlife or anything else that you need a really fast burst rate for. This camera has an ISO range between 100 and 6400. It has a built-in flash as well if you're into flash photography. This camera weighs 505 grams, so it's pretty light and small in the hand, especially for a DSLR camera. And lastly, this camera has no sort of weather sealing, so I don't recommend taking this camera in any sort of wet or dusty environments. So a couple notes on the D3200. I took this with me on a trip recently to Florida, and I got tons of photos with this camera. And honestly, knowing the constraints of it and knowing that it's a $200-ish camera, I really had nothing to complain about. Autofocus is pretty limited in capabilities, but the speed and accuracy I was very surprised about, especially for this old of a camera. Now also at $200, this has a microphone input right on the side. Of course, along with your HDMI and other various ports. Having this microphone input and 1080p up to 30 frames per second video makes this a pretty decent choice for video if you're really limited to that $200 price point. It's honestly very difficult to find a camera in around the $200 price point that records 1080p video and also has a microphone input, so you can connect a lavalier microphone or shotgun microphone, or whatever type of microphone you'd want to connect to get better audio. Besides that, this camera has a fairly small amount of buttons and dials and customizable options. but it feels good in the hand. It has a fairly deep grip, although it is kind of short, so even with my fairly small hands, my pinky definitely hangs off the bottom. But the grip's deep enough to where it's still really comfortable in the hand, even with a fairly heavy lens. Now, I did already make another video about this camera, which I'm going to link in the description as well. And actually, a lot of these cameras, I have one or even multiple videos about. So if you do want to research more into any 5 of these cameras, I will link any videos I have about them down in the description as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it with the D3200. It's the lowest price option on this list, and it records pretty decent quality video. It has manual video controls, so you can control your aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. The autofocus in video is not very good. I would recommend using manual focus pretty much all the time in video mode. Actually, one more thing I forgot to kind of talk about more. This has a 24 megapixel sensor, which again, just like the video features, for a camera of this price point and this age, 24 megapixels is actually the same resolution as Canon's new R50 that they just released. And this camera is over 10 years old. So really, overall, for the $200 price point, you're getting a fantastic photo camera and a pretty decent video camera as well. But that's pretty much it for the D3200. Let's move on to the next camera. Next up, we have the Canon 5D Classic. This is a DSLR camera from Canon that was released in 2005. So this is by far the oldest camera on this list, but this is one of my personal favorites to actually use. The 5D original has a full frame CMOS sensor with a 1x crop factor. So this is a full frame camera, which is pretty unique to find in this price point. Now the price point on this camera is right around $250. So this is one of the lowest priced full frame cameras you can buy, which already makes this an awesome deal. But this camera can shoot 12.8 megapixel full frame raw photos. It has Canon's EF mount, which is an awesome, super versatile lens mount with almost an unlimited amount of lens options. On the back, you got a 2.5-inch fixed LCD screen. This is very low resolution, very low quality. It's really not that usable for anything except just going through the menu. It's a very, very low resolution screen. Also on the back, you have an optical viewfinder. This is a DSLR camera, so another optical viewfinder. This camera can shoot up to 3 photos per second. It has an ISO range between 100 and 3200 ISO. It has no built-in flash. It weighs 895 grams, and you can see how big and bulky this is in the hand. And let me tell you, this thing is built like an absolute tank. It's so dense, it's so big and heavy and bulky that it feels absolutely amazing in the hands. However, camera size and weight really isn't a specific good or a bad thing. It's more of a personal preference. A lot of people might prefer a bigger and bulkier camera like this, but also just as many people might prefer a really tiny pocketable camera, which I will have coming, so stay tuned for those tiny cameras. But yeah, size and weight is kind of a personal preference thing, but this is a very heavy and bulky camera. And last but not least, the 5D original is weather sealed. And that kind of leads me into the fact that this is a high-end camera from Canon. It's the oldest camera on this list, but when it was released, this was a very expensive, high-end, full-frame camera. So it's gonna have the build quality, it has that weather sealing, it has the professional features, it has a lot of buttons, it's built super well, it has a decent amount of ports on the side. However, they are very old ports at this point because it was released in 2005. On the side, you have the memory card slot. This actually doesn't use SD cards. This uses compact flash cards, which I'll link down in the description. They're definitely different in an older technology than SD cards. So another thing to think about when purchasing these is, if you don't have a compact flash card or a card reader already, you're gonna need to purchase those to add on to the price. But yeah, like I said, this is one of my favorite cameras to use just because of how good it feels in the hand. And it's also almost like using a film camera. You really don't have that large of an ISO range. And it's really not gonna do good when you push it up to higher ISO. So you're gonna wanna keep it in a lower ISO. So you're really gonna have to think about your lighting and your shots themselves. It just feels so tactile and just so good in the hands to use. And you really feel accomplished getting a photo out of this camera. But also the sensor in this camera is super well known for just creating amazing, almost film-like images. And that's really just one of the great selling points about this camera. Again, I'm gonna link the dedicated video I made about this down in the description if you wanna learn more about it and see more photo examples. But a couple notes to mention about this, like I said, it creates almost film-like looking images. Just the colors and everything about the images coming out of this look fantastic. However, this camera cannot record video. This is the only camera on this list that literally can't record video. There's no record video option or button or anything like that. So this is only specifically a photo camera. And now speaking of how old this is, the autofocus is going to be pretty slow as well. It's still usable, but sometimes you might have to switch over to manual focus to really get it where you need it to be. It has a very old menu system that really isn't fun to go through and really doesn't have that many options as well. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to mention with the 5D original. This is an amazing camera, but it does have a ton of limitations, so it's kind of one of those cameras if you just want the feel of photography, almost like you're using a film camera, but of course this is a digital camera, I would definitely recommend looking more into the 5D Classic. Now real quick, I have a very serious message from today's sponsor, Aura. Okay, so I just searched up my address on Google, and literally the first website that came up had some personal information about me as well as the city that I used to live in. But even scarier, it had my relatives' full names, full addresses, as well as all the locations they used to live, and even scarier personal information about my relatives. This information is accessible because of data brokers who profit by selling your information to robocallers, telemarketers, spammers, and literally anybody else that wants to learn more information about you. But that's where today's sponsor, Aura, comes in. Aura will actually identify data brokers that are exposing your information on the internet and automatically submit opt-out requests on your behalf. And they'll even opt you out of junk mail and telemarketing lists. So what you can do is use my link, aura.com/foxtail, and get 2 weeks for absolutely free. And you'll be able to see how many data brokers are actually selling your personal information. Now, Aura's app also features a VPN, password manager, real-time credit and identity theft monitoring, and it even protects your devices from malware. Aura has almost every internet safety tool you're ever gonna need all in one single app. So let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. If you sign up right now with my link, Aura will give you 2 weeks for absolutely free, and you will be shocked at how much private information Aura finds exposed over these 2 weeks. So again, go to aura.com/foxtail or click the link down in the description to sign up for your free 2-week trial today. So huge thanks to Aura for helping protect your privacy. Now let's get back to the video. Now next up, we actually have a very similar camera. You might not have even noticed I got a different one. This is the 5D Mark II. So this is the successor to the last camera we just talked about, the 5D Classic. So right off the bat, this is a very similar camera. This is a DSLR camera released from Canon in 2009, so a couple years newer. And this camera can be found for right around $300. Now for that extra $50 to $100-ish from the 5D Classic, there's a couple main features that this camera adds, but a lot of the stuff is very similar. Like the body and ergonomics and everything like that is pretty much the exact same. So I'm not really gonna talk about that as much. So I'm gonna go ahead and run through the specs real quick, and then I'm gonna talk about one feature this camera has that really makes it stand out from every other camera on this list. So similar to the 5D Classic, this has a full frame CMOS sensor with a 1x crop factor. So if you put a 20mm lens on this camera, it'll be equivalent to 20mm. This camera does have an updated sensor though, so this camera can take full frame 21.1 megapixel raw photos, so substantially higher resolution on this. So you're gonna get sharper, better looking images out of this camera. Now this camera actually does record video, so it records 1080p up to 30 frames per second, but if you're into recording video, stay tuned because this camera has an insane feature that essentially makes this camera an unbeatable video camera at this price point. Now this also has Canon's EF mount, which again has an almost unlimited selection of first-party and third-party lenses to choose from. On the back you have a 3-inch fixed LCD screen. It's better than the 5D Classic. However, it's still not that high of a resolution screen, but it is bigger and better quality than the 5D Classic at least. And of course you have an optical viewfinder on the back because this is another DSLR. This is not a mirrorless camera. The 5D Mark II can shoot up to 4 photos per second in continuous burst mode. It has an ISO range between 100 and 6400 ISO. It has no built-in flash. It weighs 850 grams. And this camera is also weather sealed. So like I said, this is very similar to the 5D Classic. The ergonomics, the body, the shape, the feel, everything about it feels very good. This is another professional camera that was very, very expensive when it was released. So it's gonna have all those pro features again. It has a joystick on the back for going through menus and focus points. There's a little screen up top here to show some of your main settings without having to look down your viewfinder. Again, just an overall professional feeling and looking camera. But when it comes to video, this camera can record 1080p video up to 30 frames per second, and it does have a microphone input as well, and also an HDMI output if you do want to connect an external monitor. Now that video is pretty good quality out of this camera. However, where you can really maximize the video quality is actually with a firmware hack called Magic Lantern. Now, if you've never heard of Magic Lantern, I actually haven't made a video about this camera specifically with it. However, I've made a bunch of videos about the Canon EOS M with that firmware hack, which is similar to this camera. However, the 5D Mark II can do even better quality video. Again, this video would be 5 times longer if I went fully in depth on Magic Lantern video. So go check out those videos if you want to learn about it. It's essentially a firmware hack that you install in this camera, and it allows you to record much higher quality video. It actually lets you record up to 14-bit RAW video with this camera in full frame, which is literally unbeatable at this price point. Now, I'm actually working on an entire video about recording Magic Lantern RAW video with this camera, so if you want to see that, drop a comment and subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for that. But that is really what sets this camera apart when it comes to video. Of course, for photos, it's also going to be fantastic as a 21 megapixel sensor, so you're going to get really high resolution full frame photos with great dynamic range. But again, the Magic Lantern RAW video firmware hack is really what sets this camera apart from everything else on this list when it comes to recording video. Next up, we have the first mirrorless camera on this list, the Sony a6000. So this is a mirrorless camera from Sony that was released in 2014, and this comes in at right around $350 used. The a6000 has an APS-C size CMOS sensor with a 1.5 times crop factor. So if you have a 20mm lens on this camera, it'll have a field of view equivalent of about 30mm. This camera can shoot 24.3 megapixel RAW photos as well as 1080p video up to 60 frames per second. So with that 60 frames per second, you can get some decent slow motion or just really smooth video quality out of this camera. Now, like I said, this is the first mirrorless camera, so this has Sony's E-mount, which is a mirrorless lens mount, which by itself probably doesn't mean much to you. However, what that means is with mirrorless cameras, you can buy lens adapters. So you can buy an adapter to adapt almost any DSLR or vintage lens to a mirrorless camera, as well as of course the native Sony E-mount lenses, which already has a huge variety of lens options at pretty much any different price point. The Sony E-mount is probably the most versatile lens mount out there, with first-party options, third-party options at all sorts of price points, as well as, like I said, the ability to adapt almost any vintage lens or DSLR lens like a Canon EF mount or Nikon F mount. Now, I have a video I made about adapting vintage lenses to mirrorless cameras, which I'll link in the description as well if you want to learn more about that. But on the back of the a6000, you have a 3-inch tilting LCD screen, so it's not a touch screen. However, it does tilt up and down, so you can get those ultra low angle or ultra high angle shots and still have a good viewing angle on the screen, which is really nice. And since this is a mirrorless camera with no big mirror inside of the camera itself, this has an electronic viewfinder, so this will allow you to view your exposure and exactly what your photo is going to look like live, which on a DSLR camera that isn't the case since you're literally just looking through the lens through a mirror. So that's another benefit to mirrorless cameras, is those electronic viewfinders. And the a6000 can shoot up to 11 photos per second in its continuous burst mode, which is pretty fast, especially for a camera at this budget. So if you're shooting wildlife, birds, and sports and stuff like that, where you need to take a bunch of photos really fast to try to capture exactly what you need, the a6000 is a pretty good option for that. Now, this camera has an ISO range between 100 and 25,600. It has a built-in flash as well, which is really neat in this small of a camera. Speaking of the size, it weighs only 344 grams, and this body is not weather sealed at all. So just by all the specs, you can kind of tell this is a more budget-friendly camera. It's very light, it's very small. It feels more cheaply made than some of the other cameras I talked about. And again, size and weight and everything like that is more of a personal preference thing, but this is a tiny camera. You can see how it looks in my hands here. I have pretty small hands, and this fits right in the palm of my hand essentially. So a couple things to note with this, it does have wireless connection capabilities, so you can actually transfer the photos and videos from this camera directly to your phone just through an app on your phone, which is really neat. Like I said, it has the bonus of being super small and light and portable, which is really great. And in terms of buttons and dials and stuff, this is actually a pretty fully fledged camera. I mean, it has this rotating dial here, this customizable one here, a couple other custom buttons. In terms of customizability and the features and buttons, this camera is pretty solid. Now, I did already speak about the video quality. This does record pretty good quality 1080p video but it doesn't have a microphone input. All you have is a USB and an HDMI output. So in terms of getting good audio with this, you're going to need to record externally, which kind of sucks. So it's not as versatile for video as the 5D Mark II or the Nikon D3200 even, but the 1080p video quality out of this camera is really good. Now the a6000 also has pretty good autofocus, and again, I'm going to link all the videos I've made about this down in the description if you really want to learn more in depth about this specific camera and see more photo and video examples. But without further ado, let's move on to camera number 5, the final camera. Lastly, this is the newest as well as the most expensive camera on this list, the Canon M50. Now this is also the camera that I've probably created the most content about out of all these cameras. So the Canon M50 is a mirrorless camera from Canon that was released in 2018. And you can pick this camera up used for right around $450. Now I believe Canon still sells this camera new, which I'll link down in the description. However, they just released the successor to this, which is called the Canon R50. Again, I've also made a video about that camera. It's right around $680. But it is a fully fledged, really great camera in my opinion. So if you do have a higher budget than $500, you can check that out as well. Okay, I'm kind of getting off topic and this video is getting ridiculously long. So the Canon M50 has an APS-C size CMOS sensor with a 1.6 times crop factor. This shoots 24.1 megapixel raw photos, so it's a pretty good resolution sensor there. Now this camera also records 4K video up to 24 frames per second. There are a few issues with that, which I'll get into, so stay tuned for that. This has Canon's EFM mount, so this is a mirrorless camera. However, they've kind of replaced this lens mount. So at this point, it's an older lens mount with probably no new lenses going to be released for it. But again, it is a mirrorless lens mount, so you can adapt almost any vintage or DSLR lens to it. On the back, you have a 3-inch fully articulating touchscreen. This is by far the best screen on any of these cameras. I mean, this is just a fantastic screen. You can touch to change all the settings and go through the menus. It almost feels like a smartphone with how responsive it is. And also on the back, you have a really nice electronic viewfinder. This camera can shoot up to 10 photos per second. So again, a really good speed for photos if you're shooting sports or wildlife or anything like that. It has an ISO range between 100 and 25,600. And since this is the newest camera, it's probably gonna have the best high ISO performance, and you're gonna be able to get the best low light photos and videos out of this camera compared to all the rest of the cameras on this list. This camera also has a built-in flash, which is really nice. The body weighs 390 grams, and the M50 has no sort of weather sealing, so this is also a budget-friendly small mirrorless camera from Canon, so it's not going to have the professional features. But overall, the body's pretty bare bones, which is good for beginners if you're a beginner just getting into, you know, an interchangeable lens camera, but professionals definitely won't like this as much. Now this camera also has wireless connections, so you can control the camera, view back your images and videos, as well as transfer your photos and videos to your smartphone as well. Now when it comes to video quality, this is a very good camera for video. It has fantastic autofocus all around, but very good in video as well, which is very important for vlogging or any type of video where you want to have good autofocus. And so this can do 720p up to 120 frames per second, which is going to be good for super slow motion video. It can do 1080p up to 60 frames per second, which is also fantastic. But like I said, the M50 can also record 4K video at 24 frames per second. However, in this 4K mode, it's going to switch to a very bad autofocus system. It's bad enough to where I wouldn't even recommend trying to use it. I would recommend just sticking to manual focus in the 4K video mode on the M50. And also in that 4K mode, it's going to have an additional crop on your footage. So when you do switch to that mode, you'll instantly be able to see the difference in field of view. But the 1080p quality out of this camera is very good, and it'll be perfectly good enough for videos like this if you're just getting started, or for vlogging, any type of content creation. I think this is a great camera. It also has, of course, a microphone input, so you can connect a microphone to this to get much better quality audio. And on this side, it has a USB and HDMI output, so you can connect an external monitor as well. And that's pretty much all there is to mention with the M50. Like I said, I have a ton of videos going super in depth with the M50. This is the camera I've covered the most out of all of these. So if there is one you really want to dive into, I have all the links down in the description. I honestly don't even know how long this video is going to be. So if you made it to this point in the video, let me know down in the comments, and thank you so much for sticking around. I really do appreciate it. But finally, I'm going to go ahead and give a couple recommendations on these cameras. Now these are just my recommendations. Every single person watching this video will probably have a slightly different need for their camera, whether you need good quality video, good quality photos, a large lens selection, if you just need the cheapest possible option. I could go on and on, but everybody's gonna have a different need. So these are just my opinions. Don't use my recommendations as an answer to which one you should buy. However, I do have a few recommendations. First of all, if you're just looking to get into photography, you're on an extreme budget and you just want a camera to take good photos, to grow with, to learn with, and to really just to learn about the art of photography with, I think the 5D original or the 5D Mark II are fantastic options. They're professional bodies, so they're gonna feel really good in the hand, and they have professional features, even if they are pretty old at this point. They're gonna be fantastic cameras to really grow into. Next up, if your main focus is video content creation, whether it's for social media like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, or for personal use like recording home movies or anything like that, where you just want a camera that's gonna be simple to use and it's gonna record really good quality video, I would choose the Canon M50. It has great autofocus in its 1080p video modes. There's great budget lens options for this camera. It's super small, it has a microphone input port so you can get better quality audio. And overall, this is the best option for just specifically content creation and video. However, if you want to get into professional video production and cinematography and storytelling, and more narrative cinematography, but you're on an extreme less than $500 budget, I would recommend looking into the Canon 5D Mark II with the Magic Lantern firmware hack. The video quality out of this is insane. It takes a very big learning curve, so I wouldn't recommend this for complete video beginners. But if you already have some experience with video, or if you just want to really just dive into it and learn about high quality raw video and cinematography and the importance of lighting and composition and everything like that, I would recommend the 5D Mark II. But again, all these cameras take great photos, as I'm sure you've seen by some of the examples, and all of them except of course the 5D original take pretty good quality video as well. So thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you watching all the way through. Again, please consider subscribing if this helps you out and if you want to see more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next video.